Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I've got a first impressions to do for you on this little guy. If you didn't watch my unboxing from a couple nights ago, this is the ACE Biblio from Giant Mouse knives. And to summarize, I don't want to re-go over the whole thing, but to summarize, I bought an ACE Biblio before. It was, I don't know, guesstimating 2 years ago when the model was new and there was a lot of hype behind it. I got one right when some dropped and they were kind of tough to get at the time, and I got it out of the box and I went to deploy it and the action went like this, and I was like, that's weird, and then I did it again, the action went like this, and I was real frustrated with it. And pretty quickly I just put it back in the box and I sold it to somebody else for what I paid. I explained to them when I did that the reason I was selling it was because the action didn't feel great to me. At the time, I didn't try to adjust the action, to be fair, but it felt more to me like the detent was too soft than that the action was too gritty, if that helps you understand that. Anyways, I was kind of dissatisfied with it, and I resold the knife. And I mentioned that experience in my review process of the Ace Grand from Giant Mouse, a knife that I've fallen in love with. I really, really like my Ace Grand. You can watch the full review on that if you haven't already. A lot of reasons why I like that knife, and I still find it making its way into my pocket post-review regularly. So, after mentioning my experience with the Biblio and some of their other models in that review, somebody over at Giant Mouse, whoever runs their social media, was messaging with me a little bit, and we were talking about my experience with the Grand, and I was commending them for making such a cool knife. And they mentioned that they had updated the way that these are built, the Biblio. And in that update process, he said that they've addressed some of the things that I found to be at fault with it when I first got mine. And so he asked if they could send me one to prove that it was better. And what's really cool that happened since my unboxing is I sent them a link to my unboxing video, because it's of the knife that they sent me for free, which is amazing of them. And they even responded and they were like, oh, you didn't even need to review it. Like, we just wanted to send it to you just so you could see that we've improved and that it's better, and hopefully to like make it up to you for your first one not being perfect. And that, first of all, I am going to review it. I review all the knives that I get, but that's just, I'm floored by how cool they have been. Because some people, you critique their work and then they hate you forever, and they're unwilling to listen to anything you have to say, and they just write you off as being a jerk and give you no more attention or whatever. And I can understand sometimes where people are coming from with that mentality, but I love it that Giant Mouse was willing to watch my review process, understand my line of thinking, and send me a knife just to prove to me that the first one I got was a fluke. And now Giant Mouse is so much better in my head after having the Grand and loving that knife, and now having this, which is an excellent, excellent knife. So just wanted to say all that before I jump in. I'm sure in the full review I'll mention a little bit of it again, but I'm a rambler, y'all know that by this point. So anyway, this is the Burgundy Micarta version of the knife. This was from their most recent run from what I've seen, and it's the first Burgundy Micarta anything that I think I've ever had, and I kind of dig it. I'm not normally like a purple fan, and I wouldn't call this purple. It's definitely got some like kind of reddish hues, but it's a little bit purplish, and I'm generally not that big on like purple anodized titanium and purple G10 and stuff like that. It just doesn't work for me that well. I'm fine with other people liking it, but we all have different color preferences, right? Purple's just not mine. But here on this micarta, the burgundy tone, I don't know, I dig it a lot. It feels like, because it's a little bit more like dull than a typical like purple would be, and it's got that little bit of a reddish kind of like brick hue to it, it seems classy to me. And I really like it too. Like, I took a picture of it the other day with my Grand, and that being in the OD green micarta, just the contrast between the two, having two Giant Mouse knives, both in micarta, but such different shades of micarta. I don't know, they really they vibe well off of each other, and so I've enjoyed that. But this micarta itself, is finished every bit as good as it was on my Grand, which is great. It's really, really well done micarta. The edges are smoothed out and knocked down well. There's no sharp points on here. Everything's not overly round to the point where it's like, I don't know. There's still like somewhat of a corner here on the edges, but it's not sharp in any way, and I like that. No voids, no gaps, nothing like that. It's just well done micarta that feels nice in the hand. Micarta seems to have this natural kind of warmth to it as a material that I'm really drawn to, and it might be my favorite handle material. If I really like got pressed for which handle material I like best, first of all, I'd say for what, because different knives I feel like are better suited to different handle materials, but overall, if I had to pick like a favorite, it would probably be micarta, and so I really appreciate well done micarta. The size of this knife is pretty cool to me. It's a smaller EDC blade. It's one that it's kind of like my Para 3 in the sense that I've carried it a few times as a secondary. It works for me in that application, but I can also carry it as a primary, and it doesn't necessarily feel too small. It's on the smaller end of what I'd carry as a primary, but it still fills my hand well enough and has enough utility that I'm not really that worried if this is the knife I have as my primary, that I'm going to run into a task out in the world that I'm incapable of accomplishing with this knife. So I've really enjoyed the size of it, that it can kind of fit both roles. That just makes it twice as likely to get carried for me. So I dig the size. I dig that on Giant Mouse knives they crown their spines. On this one, it's not as crowned as my Grand, but it is still rounded in a really nice way. I love that they place their jimping forward on the blade instead of back here. When I'm in a saber grip, my thumb feels so much better up here, like I'm going to be push cutting through material, feather sticking, something like that. And back here, I just don't need extra grip. Up here, it makes so much more sense putting my thumb right there on the blade. Love that they do that, and it's done very well too. It's restrained amount of jimping in the right place, and it's not too aggressive of jimping, and I am very critical of jimping that's too aggressive and there's too much of it and all of the above. So I really like the amount of jimping they've done here. I also like that here in the finger choil they've kind of rounded the opposite side of the flipper tab where that choil is a little bit. When you see, I just talked about this knife, so like on the Para 3, that finger choil, come on focus, has jimping in it, and that's fine for the nature of this knife. Maybe it's just because I'm used to it, like that's how it's supposed to feel to my head on a Para 3, but I love it on this knife that it's smooth and it's even rounded a little bit. This is a very comfortable spot to choke up, and with that jimping far forward, choking up on this knife feels really intuitive. It feels like you're meant to do it, and I like that. I like this grip on the knife, being able to choke up so well, put my thumb all the way up here. It just gives me a really good controlled sensation of the blade. The knife is super indexed, and it's really, really good. So I'm going to be carrying this for at least a week before I do my full review, probably a little longer because I've got a bunch of loaners coming in. I actually have an unboxing I need to do when I get home, and some more on the way. So it may take me a little while to get to my full review of this, but ultimately, based on my first impressions alone, I'm stoked that this knife has such a good action, because with the flipper tab, it's excellent. The detent on this one is fantastic. When I unboxed it, I noticed that it was a little bit gritty and stiff on the closing. This knife still isn't drop shutty, but what I did was I put like a drop of KPL on each side in the bearings, and that helped a lot. And then I also put the tiniest drop of like just the littlest I possibly could right on the detent ball, and then I just kind of smoothed it over the track a little bit, and I think that's where my little bit of grittiness was actually coming from. The bearings were smooth all along, but it was the way that the detent ball was riding on the track. I assume part of it is just that it needs to break in and kind of build its own groove there, which is fine. But to speed that up a little bit and make it fun in the meantime, I did put that tiniest little dab of KPL on there. And now the smoothness of this knife, like I said, it's not a drop shutter guillotine, but overall, the action, it's just fantastic, and the closing now is very smooth. It doesn't feel like it has much resistance at all. I think part of why it's not, frankly, like super drop shutty is just because this is a pretty thin, small blade. And so if this had a blade the thickness and size of the Grand on it, it would probably fall shut a lot easier. But yeah, I love also that it's multiple deployment methods, that I can middle finger flick this. Makes it way more fun of a knife for me. Holes are greater than studs. I stand by that to this day. I love having a hole for deployment. It's just, in my opinion, my favorite deployment method is to have a hole. If I could have any of the major deployment methods, flipper, thumb studs, hole, thumb disc, you name it, I'm pretty consistently going to gravitate towards the hole. I like that on this one. It's very accessible with my thumb as well. It's very easy to actuate this. And with how stiff the detent is, it's not too stiff, but it's like almost too stiff. It's a crispy detent. So when I do thumb flick this one, sometimes with thumb hole knives, like actually thumb flicking them out is like the least favorable method for me. When I middle finger flick, it's like I get a different type of swing out of it. But here, because the detent is so crisp, it's rock solid, steady, perfect deployment every single time, and I like that. So yeah, I'm floored that this knife is as good as I hoped it would be the first time I got one. And it's as good as I wondered it must be, as I've seen so many people rave about the model. I've seen so many people consistently across the hobby, on Instagram, in other YouTube reviews, on Facebook. Man, this fly is gonna drive me insane. I've seen so many people on any platform that I'm on related to knives just rave about the Biblio and just not let go of how great it is. And I was frustrated when the one I had didn't live up to that, and it made me feel like a crazy person. But this one I feel like kind of it brings it all home. It makes it feel like the model should, based on everything I've heard about it. And I'm really, really glad that Giant Mouse sent this to me so that they could prove that, because they were right. This is objectively way better than that first one that I had, and I hope that this is how they're all coming now. I have no reason to believe they're not, because this is the one that I'm holding, and this is from their newest batch, and so I'm glad to hear that it's come this far. So that'll be my first impressions. This is, oh my goodness, this is a fly trying to get into my brain. This is the Giant Mouse ACE Biblio in Burgundy Micarta, and it is a cool little knife.